And thank you all for attending. This is a really busy time of year, and we really appreciate all of our panelists and everyone that have joined us, especially Senator Loeffler and Senator Lee, both really incredible leaders for our political movement and our party, and they've really risen to the occasion here. Senator Loeffler, I have so much respect and admiration for her. She is one of the only people that really saw this opportunity to protect girls like my daughters in sports and their opportunities, and it wasn't even hard for her to step out and do it. She just did it. She saw it as the right thing to do. And we also have Senator Mike Lee joining us today, who's a co-sponsor of her legislation. So I just want to welcome Senator Loeffler. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's great to be with y'all. Thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you. And Senator Lee, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. Hey, anything for you all, for the cause, and for my friend Kelly Loeffler.
So we're just going to jump right into it because people have very busy schedules. There's a lot going on with votes and everything else that's going on. So Senator Loeffler, why don't you just start off with telling us why you wanted to do this legislation to protect girls' sports and opportunities in schools, and what made you do it?
Sure. Well, look, I grew up playing sports, and sports were so important to me. I'm someone who was born and raised on a farm. I grew up with, actually, I had braces on my legs, and I went to kindergarten with a patch on my eye and was very shy. And I found that sports really helped build my confidence, not just my confidence in my physical abilities, but in my ability to have resilience and learn teamwork and respect for others. And so I saw the importance of sports for women, and I was really fortunate to be born and going to school after Title IX had passed. And I saw what it meant to be able to compete, to be able to have the resources to level the playing field for women and girls. I ended up playing so many different sports: softball, track, volleyball, basketball, and wasn't great at any of them, but ultimately struggled my way through track and went on to run marathons. So I attribute that to the opportunities that I gained in sports, and I attribute my own success in life to a lot of the qualities I learned in sports. And I want that for every girl. And when I saw that Title IX was at risk of losing its ability to provide those opportunities for girls in an educational setting where federal funding was received, it was really common sense to introduce that legislation to protect the progress that Title IX offered girls in an educational setting, whether through sports or other activities, and found it very common sense to say that girls should compete against other biological girls in sports, and to make sure that we kept that level playing field. And I just really appreciate my good colleague, Mike Lee, for his support in this and working with me on this. So, you know, we're continuing to see what we can do to get this passed into law.
No, it's so important. Your leadership has been paramount. There was no one in the Senate that had stepped up to introduce this legislation. We had legislation in the House, but no one had done it, and it was awesome to have you on board. And you didn't just introduce it alone. You were able to build a working group and a working coalition. And Senator Lee, you joined that coalition. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why you decided to join Senator Loeffler in her pursuit in this legislation.
Oh, thanks so much, and thanks for drawing attention to this issue. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. Been concerned about this for some time. It was highlighted. It's certainly not the first time I had become aware of the issue, but when the Supreme Court issued its landmark decision in Bostock versus Clayton County, my former boss, Justice Alito, signaled that if applied to Title IX, this blurring of the distinction between the sexes and conflating of the term sex as used in our civil rights legislation with gender could end up causing big problems in many areas, including and especially in girls and women's athletics. We've seen now over the last year or so, example after example of instances in which biological males have gamed the system, always to the detriment of biological females in girls and women's athletics, sometimes to their detriment in the sense that they have to compete unfairly and sometimes to their detriment, and that in some instances there have been very serious injuries resulting from this type of unfair competition. And one of the things that I thought was significant is that when APP placed an ad in Michigan, calling to account a couple of candidates, including the Biden-Harris campaign and including the Gary Peters campaign in Michigan, over the fact that both Peters and Biden support legislation that would undo and would further erode protections for girls and women in women's athletics. Social media empires lashed out. Facebook, in fact, took the advertisement down, saying that the advertisement lacked context. I reached out to Mark Zuckerberg and others at Facebook and asked what context it lacked. In a sense, anytime you advertise any product, you're leaving out other context. If you're trying to advertise Coke, Pepsi could say you don't portray it in context with Pepsi. This is much more devious even than that, though, where you had a social media giant, Facebook, simply saying, we don't like the message. The message, by the way, was truthful. That is that legislation supported by these two candidates would, if enacted, bring to an end girls and women's athletics, because it would make it impossible for girls to compete. And it would make it impossible for there to be anything other than just unisex competition. It's a sort of backdoor judicial fiat imposed soft repeal of Title IX. So I support Senator Loeffler, and I support her wholeheartedly in her campaign. I really like this legislation. It's something we really need, and I appreciate her leadership in this area.
Yeah, it strikes me as something that's just, most of us take it as common sense, but today in this crazy world that we live in, it sometimes takes a little bit more courage to have that common sense and to take these types of bold stands. And I do want to mention that the other really great thing is that both you and Senator Loeffler have also taken bold stands up against big tech and their efforts to censor the American people and groups like us. And so it's like I've got the best of both worlds, and we might have to do another Zoom meeting on big tech censorship down the road once we go. But Senator Loeffler, I know that you got a busy schedule. I just want to give you an opportunity to say anything else that you want to add to this conversation. We've got quite a few people on board. You're doing a great job. We love everything you're doing. You've taken all these courageous stands. Anything you want to say in closing, or before you have to get running?
Well, I just want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing. It's so important, and you see what's at stake here. I mean, this is really family values, American values, freedom, the level playing field that we all owe one another, and we're fighting for that. And I just want to thank you for fighting for our religious freedom, for our free speech, for pushing back against the cancel culture of big tech. I know we're going to continue that work, and so you have a partner in this fight, and I will continue to advocate for these faith, family, freedom-based policies, because that's what's at stake, not only in this runoff, but really as we go forward into 2021. So thank you for all the work you do, and it was really an honor to be with you today.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And on behalf of the 31,000 people that signed our Save Women's Sports petitions in Georgia, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for leading that fight, and best of luck. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Mike.
So we're going to go into some question answer. We've received a few questions from people in the audience so far. Senator Lee, can you stick around for some questions?
Sure, you bet.
Okay, so let me, sorry, they were being texted into me. So the first one is actually from Representative Fred Deutsch from South Dakota. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's actually another courageous legislator, much like yourself. He said, South Dakota will be soon introducing similar legislation next month. Although we have a supermajority of Republicans in each chamber, we are challenged by Republicans who do not favor the bill due to concerns that state boycotts will cause economic harm. Do you have any strategic suggestions? I think that might have been addressed to both of us with our positions, but what would you say to him?
Look, it's a legitimate question, Fred, and it's sad that we should even be in a position where anyone could be against this. If you had brought forward legislation like this, 20, 15, even 10 years ago, I don't think people would have even understood why you would need to bring it, because people would just understand intuitively that the laws of science and physics and the laws that society has honored for thousands of years would seem to make this obvious. As far as boycotts go, I think people need to be asked the question, those who are putting on boycott efforts, those who are trying to agitate in favor of boycotts against states that do this, they need to be asked the question, why? We recently had the head of the NCAA in front of a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, and I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and I asked him about some legislation that was enacted in Idaho that was sort of along these same lines. The NCAA representative who was there as the head of the NCAA said, yes, well, this is controversial and there are good arguments on both sides of this. I then raised with him the question of why it was that when Idaho had enacted similar legislation, the NCAA started immediately threatening to withdraw certain tournament activities, certain playoff activities from the state of Idaho in response to it. He didn't really have any answer to that question. So I pushed him a little bit further and I said, do you think it's okay to subject girls and women to competition from biological males? And he defaulted back to, well, this is a controversial position and it's a difficult question. And I pointed out to him, if it's a difficult question, then why on earth did you come out and threaten the state of Idaho for enacting legislation saying something as simple as boys and girls should compete in athletic competitions assigned to their sex? And he didn't have an answer for it. So I wish I had an easier answer for you there. I share that story only to point out that sometimes people who call for these boycotts have not always, sometimes, but not always. These are people who have been operating in an echo chamber, and it shows. They haven't always been asked questions like those that I described a moment ago. I think people need to be able to answer those questions in public. And sometimes when you ask them those questions in public, their determination to wage a boycott effort dissipates.
Senator, I just got another question that came in that leapfrogs right off of this. Do you foresee any, this is from Doreen Denny, do you foresee any Senate hearings on this legislation in the upcoming Congress?
I would certainly like to see hearings on them, and I'm not aware of any that have been scheduled, in part because very few hearings have been scheduled. The scheduling of hearings is up to the committee chairman typically, and committee chairmanship hasn't been finally determined and won't be until these two Senate races in Georgia are complete.
Beth Stelzer, she's actually the founder of Save Women's Sports. She asked, and this is something that actually keeps coming up the more we push this type of legislation and the more we work with these young female athletes. My question for the panel is, how do we help create a safe environment for current athletes to be able to speak up about the issue without repercussions? This is the biggest hurdle I find when organizing the team at Save Women's Sports. So what we find is that a lot of these female athletes are unwilling to put their names out in public and publicly oppose these types of efforts from the radical left, and even just stand up for their own rights because of the types of death threats and the threats of public humiliation, all that on social media. Before I hand it over to you, Senator Lee, I just want to say, I think this is where groups like Save Women's Sports and American Principles Project are really needed in organizing more and more people and identifying the people that are willing to speak up. I think that the important thing here is to start with the courageous, the people that are going to run through the brick walls, that don't really care about the social consequences or anything like that. And then once they see that there's enough of that, then you'll start to get the more timid people, the people that are worried about those consequences. But Senator Lee, I wonder what you would have to say about to any woman or young athlete that's a female that's worried about speaking up about this issue.
First of all, telling a story always helps. Anytime you can point to an example, and the more personal it is for the individual telling it, the more persuasive it generally will be. When you have female athletes in particular who have had to go through this, who have lost a scholarship or lost a position in playoffs or in a tournament of some sort or another, after having to compete with a biologically male athlete in a competition reserved for girls or women, they should talk about it. If they feel comfortable doing so, if they just tell their story, they don't have to condemn those who are competing, because that isn't the point. The point is just to tell the story, and then for girls and women affected by this sort of thing, to ask questions like, why exactly do we have men's and women's athletics anymore? What's the point in having them if any biological male is free to identify in good faith or not in good faith as a girl or as a woman in order to get around that? Sometimes by simply asking that question, you can get people thinking about things. I've asked that question to a number of people on both sides of this issue. There are those who will argue that it's a matter of testosterone levels, and that if someone has transitioned from one sex to another, and that if their testosterone levels put them at a level consistent with biological females, that might do the trick. I think questions need to continue to be asked about things like that. Because look, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a politician and a lawyer. But I do know that there is a difference, particularly once a human being has gone through puberty. There are significant differences that outlast a transition. Someone who has matured as a male and gone through puberty as a male has acquired bone mass and muscle mass and other physical differences that are relevant to athletic competition, and that can't simply be negated as a result of testosterone levels and identification.
Well, and that actually leads into one of the next questions we got from a gentleman named Ryan Burrell. He asks, what are some examples of women's dreams being crushed by a transgender athlete? There's actually, going into the testosterone and the bone density question, there's a UFC fighter named Fallon Fox who was born male, but then started to identify as female, and they got into a match, and they actually ended up crushing the skull of their opponent just because of that mismatch in genetics there. And actually, our team at American Principles Project has identified over 57 cases in the United States alone. That's not even counting the rest of the world, where girls are losing championships and scholarships and opportunities in sports. This is really happening, and that's what when you were questioning the big tech executives about our ads and why they censored them, we were cheering you on so much, because we had provided all of these cases of where women's opportunities are being stolen and destroyed, and they were just falling on deaf ears at the fact checkers at Facebook. And so I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, Senator, but
sure. There are a number of examples, and there are more examples coming to light almost every day. One of the more prominent ones involves mixed martial arts. There's a male fighter named Fallon Fox who managed to shatter the eye socket of Tamika Brents, who was a female mixed martial arts athlete. And Brents said that she had never felt so overpowered in her life. There in football, there's a male player, Christina Ginther, sued the Minnesota Independent Women's Football League when they determined that it was unsafe to let him play against women. Now, the league had changed its eligibility policy in 2012, requiring players to certify that they are and always have been female. But a jury awarded Ginther $20,000 for being discriminated against under state law. and he was placed on multiple women's sports teams. There's a male runner named Aaron Taylor who won first place in his very first attempt at the Jacksonville Women's Marathon. And these and countless other examples. We've had instances in which biological males have achieved and abused to the disadvantage of their female competitors, their differences in strength and size. Roller derby, there's a really nasty example from roller derby. There's a 6'7", 270-pound biological male who was featured on something called the Roller Girl Project. This was a blog showing different body types and different roller derby skaters. You can only imagine, anyone who's ever watched roller derby or knows anything about it knows that can't possibly be fair or safe to the female competitors in that.
So and we have time for one more question, and this one's actually a really good one. It comes from Arthur Freeman. He says, other than talking to our family and friends about the unfair advantage that biological males have against biological females in various sports, knowing that boys are genetically stronger, more agile than girls, what else can we do as in the general public to protect girls from this insanity of allowing males to compete in female sports? Senator, I'll give that to you and then I'll close with it.
Anytime we can use language of inclusion and make clear to people this has nothing to do with animus, this is not about being transphobic or having anything against transgendered persons. This is a simple question of fairness and physical safety. When we put it in those terms, I think people are generally more receptive than when we speak about it in terms that are needlessly condemnatory. And as we've seen in other contexts, it is not always as much it's not just that we should be concerned about any transgendered person who was born male participating in girls and women's athletics. That raises its own set of concerns. It's not just about those. It is especially about those biological males who might, as a pretext, use certain words in order to qualify themselves to participate in girls and women's athletics. Some of them might do it in order to win a prize or a trophy or a scholarship. Others might do it just to prove that they can or for bragging rights. Others still might do it in a deliberate sadistic effort to harm girls and women. That's not to say that people who are actually transgendered individuals would ever act for that purpose. I'm willing to assume for purposes of this discussion, they wouldn't. But there are some who would and who will. And if you don't have rules in place governing what a biological male can do, you're going to have a problem. In other words, it's not necessarily about transgendered people at all. What we are most concerned about here are those who would abuse this under the pretext that they are transgendered when they are not. And the difficulty that inheres in drawing lines around who may participate in girls and women's athletics and who may not. I don't have an easy solution or an easy answer to all these questions, but I do know that it's got to be based on something more than just someone's mere assertion that they identify as female. That can't be the case. I don't know very many. In fact, I don't know of a single female who could compete with this 6'7" 270-pound man participating in roller derby. In our common human experience, that's not how it works, and that's unfair, and it's dangerous to girls and women participating in sports.
No, I think that's exactly right, and I want to get back to something that you brought up, which is inclusion. You know, I've been in the conservative movement since I was just a little kid, and I've been actually pleasantly surprised by when I talk to people in the movement that are working on this issue of protecting girls' sports and opportunities, at how open they are to making all types of accommodations and still including people based on their identities. I mean, they're open to creating additional sports leagues and having additional competitions that, you know, meet their accommodations and meet their needs so that no one's left out. And I think that that's exactly right. This isn't about identities. What this is really about is fairness and opportunities. And, you know, my mom was, I went back home for Christmas, and my mom was telling me about the women's rights fight and Title IX and how hard women had to work to actually get these types of opportunities in education, and to sacrifice any of that just because a small group of people or a small political group is demanding additional rights that erase the rights of girls like my daughters. We just can't let that happen. And so we're just so thankful for you, Senator Lee, and your leadership on this, and obviously Senator Loeffler's leadership on this. And we're so thankful for you. And all that you do, and the courage that you've shown here, and you know, I think that the other thing that we do outside of this, outside of just talking to friends and families, we do what every other organization in this country does, which is we organize, we engage, and we engage in legislation and politics. When someone asks me what they can do to protect girls' opportunities and fight against this madness, I always ask them, okay, besides talking to your family and friends, have you contacted your senator? Have you contacted your congressman? Have you contacted your state senator, your state legislator? Have you contacted your governor? How many of these guys have we actually, because I remember my dad was in Congress for 2 years, and they kept meticulous notes on everyone that would call in with a concern about legislation for or against. And they use that to determine how they vote sometimes. You know, if an overwhelming percentage of their district is against a piece of legislation or wants something to happen, they're going to be more likely to support it. I hear all the time from legislators and senators, well, we just don't really hear from our constituents about this issue. And that's the big task that American Principles Project has, is we're trying to become, I call it the NRA for families. Same way that the NRA organizes gun owners in politics, we want to organize parents and families and girls and young kids in politics and in Congress and in legislation to protect the family, protect our rights, and protect our children and all of that. We want to make it easier to get married, have babies, and protect our kids. That's very simple. And there's so many threats. And so I tell people, we got to organize, we got to engage, we got to talk to our members of Congress and contact them like crazy, because they make decisions like this. So anyway, we're just so thankful for you, Senator. We're thankful for all of you that joined. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of people that joined. Thank you so much for all the questions. I thought this was a great conversation. And we will talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much. Have a great night.